Inset seams seem to be intimidating to a lot of people, but they're really very easy. It's just simply a matter of sewing dot to dot. And I'm going to demonstrate to you how you would do it both with machine sewing and with hand sewing. If I want to sew these 3 pieces together, that's going to give me an inset seam right here. The first step I need to do is to mark the dots on each of the 3 pieces. So you know where to begin and stop your sewing. The next step would be to line up your first pieces. You line up the cut edges exactly, and then we're going to sew dot to dot. Okay, now you can see where I began and where I stopped sewing right at those dots. When you're doing it by machine, you want to make sure that you do a little back stitch at the beginning and the end, sort of lock it in place so that that seam will not come out. What that does, it leaves that little Y, which is what you have to have in order to get the inset seam. The next step is to sew the first seam of this inset seam. So the first seam you're going to sew will be along here. You're going to start at the dot, do a little back stitch forward and back with your sewing machine, and then stitch to that next dot. And here you can see the completed stitch. Then this just, because we haven't gone into the other seam, you just pivot this around up to the next side, pin it in place, start once again right at the dot or where that other line of stitching ended, do a little forward and backwards, go up to this next dot, and there you have it. And when it opens out, you've got that perfect Y seam. So when I'm going to sew these by hand, I am going to, again, line up the cut edges. I'm going to put a pin at the end and come out right at my dot, and I'm just going to sew to the dot right where that pin came out. And I'm going to start at the dot on this end. And since I've got a knot in my thread, I don't really have to worry about doing any kind of a back stitch. I'm just going to sew along. When I do hand piecing, I do a little bit of a running stitch, and then I smooth out the stitches every time I come up. Now as I'm approaching that dot, I'm going to just go right to where the pin is and then pull the pin out. And I'll make my knot. I just do a little loop, come through the loop, and cut it off. Now, by stopping at that seam, it allows me a Y seam, which is going to help me to do the pivoting I need to get the other piece in at that Y. So now I'll take the next piece, I'm going to put it on top. I'm going to bring the seam allowance over to my left and take that pin, put it in here, pull it back. You see how it comes out right at the dot, and I'm going to just sew to that dot. So I'm going to start at the dot, and I'm just going to go right towards the Y seam. Come right to the dot, then take the pin out. Then I just pivot this piece, turn the pieces, line it up exactly, stick the pin in. Now make sure the seam allowance is all to the right, and I'm going to push this needle against the seam allowance, come in, and continue on like this. I'm going to stop at the dot, come through the loop, and you still have that perfect pivot point. Being able to sew an inset or Y seam is an essential skill for every quilter, And now you know the secrets to getting terrific results every time.